Yo, what's up, good people? Welcome to this series where we continue with our discussion of integrating M-Pesa into our web and mobile applications. At this point, we have the consumer key, the consumer secret, and the passkey, and we'll use that together with the authorization and M-Pesa Express API and see how we can send an STK push to our user's phone. And that's what we'll be focusing on this video. While I was sharing the post of this M-Pesa integration series, some people are asking me which technology we'll be using during the sessions. And my answer to them was, M-Pesa integration is not about the stack that you'll use and also not about the code that you'll be writing, but it's actually about you as a developer understanding the flow. Because M-Pesa is the most basic API that you need to understand, as it provides a very simple REST infrastructure. It's just request and response. So you are provided you can send a request in any language and receive a response in whatever language. You are good to go. This session is for you. Whether you're using PHP, Python, or JavaScript, Node.js, you are just good to go. This video will focus on the M-Pesa Express API, but we already discussed about an overview of all the APIs, and we said that all APIs depend on the authorization API, because the authorization APIs provides a time-bound access token that is required by all the other Safaricom APIs. So if you forgot about the M-Pesa Express, I'll just give you an overview. We said that the M-Pesa Express API facilitates a merchant-initiated online payment. So this M-Pesa Express API is just a C2B transaction, but now the initiator is the organization instead of the customer. So to learn more about this API, you can just visit the Daraja portal and read more about it. But I'm interested in the process of how that API works. So first, it's here. I wrote it down, but I just lifted it from the Daraja portal and pasted it here. So how this API works, the merchant here is the partner of the organization. You capture and set the required parameters, then you send the API request. Then the API receives the requests and validates it, then sends you an acknowledgement response. Then the STK push is triggered and it's sent to the user who is making the payment. Then after the users have confirmed by entering their PIN, a response is sent back to M-Pesa and it's processed. Then once it is processed, the result will be sent back to the API, which is then forwarded to the merchant via the callback URL in the specified request. Then after that, the customer will receive an SMS confirmation message of the payment. So that's basically how this M-Pesa Express API works. It's also called Lipa and M-Pesa Online API. So it's also called this, it has two names. Yeah. Okay. The Auth API, you have talked about this a lot of times. It's just an API that generates a token that is going to be used within the request headers of each and every other request of the other APIs that you use. So whatever language you are using, if it's a framework, you can use the concepts of making this as a middleware which will run every time before any requests. If it's a core language, you can decide to make this a function of its own, which will be called every time before any other function is called. Or you can also use the concept of high order function, where this function will run first, then after it is complete, the other function inside that function now will run. So the most important thing is just to get the token. So you can just find a logic where you'll be able to run this function of the authorization API first before any other request or any other APIs. So someone also asked me if you can generate this token once, and my answer to that is the answer is I can't say no, but keep in mind that this token has an expiry time of seconds. So unless you are aiming to write code every 3 or so seconds, the answer is no. We can't generate this token once. We have to generate it every time before using any other API. To generate the access token, you can follow these 3 steps. just simple and straightforward. So first you need to create a base64 encoding of the consumer key and consumer secret separated by a colon. Note there's no space between the consumer key and the colon, and there's also no space between the colon and the consumer secret. It's just one huge string, and you'll get the base64 encoding of that. You can get a base64 encoding in any language, and provided you know what you need, you can just get what you need in any language. So after that, you just set your headers. The authorization header, you set it to basic, then a space, then the encoded credentials. So this one's the base64 of this is the encoded credentials. So you just attach that basic, a space, and that, then you set that as the value of the authorization header. Then after that, you just send a GET request to the appropriate endpoint based on the environment. So for sandbox, this is the endpoint, and for live, if you're using the live, this is the endpoint. So they're just the same. The difference is just the domain. So for sandbox, they use this sandbox subdomain. Then for the live, they use this API subdomain. So that means that you can build fully on sandbox, and then after you complete, you can just change these endpoints. You can just change the endpoint from sandbox to live. You can do that, it's allowed. Also, I have some code snippets here in JavaScript and Python. The code snippets are tested, so you can just copy this code and try it out, and I guarantee you they'll work. We can go through this code. So you can see, one, I needed the consumer key and the consumer secret. They're here, and these ones are the URLs. There are two, one for the sandbox and one for the live. So if you copy this code, you need to comment one of them. And then there's this function here that gives us the 64 encoded value of the consumer key and the consumer secret. And there's this colon. You can see there's no space between the consumer key and the consumer secret. There's no space. It's just one huge string, which I just converted into base64, and I stored it into this variable. I call it encoded credentials. Then the next thing is I set the headers, and the headers is just, there's this authorization key, which its value should be basic, then a space, then the encoded credentials, which you got up here. Then after that, you just send your request. That's what I did here. I send this request, and you can see the only parameters that I passed is just the headers, no other parameters. Then it will give back data, and one of the data that will come from this is the access token, and in this case here I'm just returning the access token. And if we say that if you're using a middleware, you can just save it so that it can be received in the next function. And if you're using a higher order function, or just a function that runs before another function, you can just return the access token so that you can pass it as headers of the next request. So for me, you can say I use the function, so I'm just returning the access token, and I'll just be calling this function every time I need this access token. That's what we said. That's how we said we'll be using this function. So you can see for Python it's just the same thing. It's just the same thing in Python. So as I say always, regardless of the language, as long as you know what you're supposed to do, you can just do it. So you can see it's almost similar. It's similar to what we had in JavaScript. Is the same thing that you have in Python. Just the difference is just the syntax. So after getting the token, now we can use this M-Pesa Express API. To send an STK push, we can follow these steps. I wrote some steps. So the first step is just to generate the timestamp, and this timestamp should be in this format, which is year, month, day, hours, minutes, and seconds. And to generate that in Node.js, I just provided this here. You just use the date constructor to get the timestamp. Also, you can use moment.js, but I didn't see why you should use a dependency while we can just write code ourselves. And the same thing is just with Python. Just get the timestamp from the datetime module. Then after getting the timestamp, the next thing is to get a password, an STK password, and this STK password is just a 64-base encoded value of the shortcode, the passkey, and the timestamp. So this timestamp that you generate here, we'll use it to generate the password. And keep in mind, if you are live, the shortcode is the pay bill number, and in case of you're using a till number, the shortcode is the store number. And we say that the shortcode for Sandbox is, I think we'll just see it down here, it's here. This is the shortcode for Sandbox, it's 174.379. That's the shortcode for Sandbox. So if you're using Sandbox, you can use that as the value of shortcode here. So after getting the password, the next thing you're supposed to do is prepare the request body. And here is where most people are confused. So I'll just explain each key and what it represents. So the first, you can see the first one is the business shortcode, and this business shortcode is the pay bill number. So if you're using a pay bill, the business shortcode will be the pay bill number. And if you're using a till, this business shortcode will be your store number. So for pay bills is the pay bill number, and for the tills is the store number. So yeah, the password here will just be the password that we generated up here. So the password that we generate up here, this password is the one that will pass here in the generated password. Then the timestamp is also the timestamp that we generated here. In step 1, we generated a timestamp, we'll also use that timestamp here. Then the account type. So account type for pay bills is usually customer pay bill online, and if you're using buy goods still, you can just say customer buy goods online. So there are just two options, either customer pay bill online or customer buy goods online, depending on the one you're using. So if you're using Sandbox, you'll just put customer pay bill online because this one is for a pay bill here. For Sandbox, this one is for the pay bill. Okay, then the next thing is one party. After transaction type, the amount, and the amount is just the amount to be paid, the amount that our user should pay. The other thing is on party A. Party A is the phone number of the user who is paying. And Safaricom, it insists that this one should be the format. It starts with 254, then 7, then the number. But I don't know, for me, if I'm asked my number, I usually say 07, then the number. So you can just write a small logic of converting any number that the user inputs, and you convert it to this format. For example, some users might input +254, then their number. Some users might input 07, then the number. So instead of forcing users to use this format, you can just let a user use the format that they want. Then you will convert it into this format that Safaricom requires. Then party B. So party B is where the money goes. So if you are using a pay bill, party B will be the pay bill number, and if you are using a till, party B will be the till number. So that's where the money goes. Then phone number is just phone number. I don't know why there is this and this sort of them are phone numbers. I didn't understand, but phone number is just the same as what was there in party A. It's just the phone number of the person paying. Then callback URL should be we'll discuss this later, but just an online URL. We'll discuss this in detail in future sessions, so you can just leave that there. Then this account reference, if you're doing offline payments, this account reference is the one that you're going to enter as account number. So in the manual payments, you usually enter the pay bill, then the account number. So this is the account number, so you can just leave it as account, because for tills they usually don't have the account number. But and then this transaction description, it's the description of the payment. I've actually not used this so much. I just put this test placeholder. I rarely use it, so I can't explain much about it. So yeah, so this is the request body. So as long as all these are correct, your STK push will be sent. But if any of the details here is not correct, especially the shortcodes, if it's not correct, the STK push will not be sent. So okay, so after that, the next thing is just to set set the headers, and we said that before sending the request we have first to generate the token. So you can see this line first here, it generates the token, it calls that function that we created up there, the one for authorization API, to generate the token. Then you'll set the headers for this M-Pesa Express API, and the authorization header will have a value of bearer, then the token. So it's bearer, then there is a space, then the token. Then after that you just send a post request to this endpoint. So this endpoint is for sandbox, as you have said earlier. For live you just change this sandbox here to API, so it will be api.safaricom, and everything else remains the same. So that's the only difference between sandbox and live in matters of the endpoints. We just change this first subdomain here of the endpoint, but everything else remains the same. So here is just the full code. We integrated everything here, so maybe you can just go through this one. So you can see this send STK push function. It's first calling this get access token function, because you said you first have to authorize before you can use any other API. So after getting that, you'll just use, here I'm using this sandbox URL, sandbox endpoint. Then I'm setting the header just as how we saw, then the request body, then I'm sending a post request to that request body and the headers. Then after getting the response, I'm just logging the data. So basically that is how you send an STK push. Maybe you can just write a simple code here. Maybe you can write a Python code to test it. So I'll just create a new file. I'll just say test.py. Then I'll just copy this code here for Python. This one for Python. Or I already have one. I have a hybrid code that has mixed this code here for Python and also this one for generate access token, and I put some actual pass key and it's here. Let me just get the code from the clipboard. It's there. So this is the full Python code. I just put the consumer key and the consumer secret that I got, but this consumer key and secret you should not push it anywhere. These mine are for testing purposes, but you should not always share your consumer key or secret, and also you should not share your pass key. Since I'm using the sandbox, I'm not afraid to share, and I'm not using this app. Okay, so this is everything that you have discussed. So first you have said that first you have to generate the token, and this is how you're generating the token. You can see the code is there. Then next, after generating the token, we write another function for sending the STK push using the M-Pesa Express API. So we have said before using any API, you first call this generating token first, then this token will be used to send this request. These headers here, they use the token. You can see there's this token that is being used there. So yeah, so this is the full code, and if you run this code, the STK push will be sent. So you can just open the terminal and run the code. So now if I run the code, you can see I'll get this response that I printed it there, and I get an STK push in my phone. So yeah, so that is how you send an STK push, and you can do the same in any language as long as you understand the logic. So that is it for this video, guys. See you in the next. You see I was printing this JSON here, that's why we saw this part here, and you can see the request has been accepted for processing. So the STK has been sent successfully, and it's here in my phone. So So see you in the next video, guys, where we'll be discussing about how to handle the STK push. So see you there. Peace out.